Enjoying this podcast? Then we think you might love the audio long read, the podcast of The Guardian Long Read, showcasing the best long-form journalism, with episodes about everything from the rise of ADHD to the double life of an alleged Russian spy. The Long Read offers great stories and big ideas. Follow the audio long read wherever you get your podcasts.
In the run-up to next week's AI summit in Paris, a separate gathering was held in London for some of AI's biggest users.
I use AI for fun and to mess around with art styles.
I use ChatGPT a lot. For example, I study physics at A-level, so it's quite memory intensive and a lot of concepts I need to remember and understand. So I use ChatGPT to break it down for me.
At the Children's AI Summit, I got to speak to the generation who will live side by side with a rapidly developing technology that holds both promise and peril, and could define their futures. If you were to give a message to, people in charge about AI and young people and what you'd like to see, what would it be?
That's a good question.
Be more stricter on the laws about AI, put restrictions and double check everything before you put it out for the world to see.
Pay attention to the ethical issues that AI could potentially cause. A lot of biases like racial biases, gender biases in their answers. So I would like them to be quite careful with that. We are the future, and I strongly advise other adults to also acknowledge that the young people will be the ones leading in the future as well.
They had a lot to say and will be taking their own charter to Paris in the hope of inspiring world leaders and AI bosses. But it'll be a packed agenda. In just the past few weeks, a Chinese chatbot has upended the industry and sparked fears of a new AI arms race. So today, as the global players in AI prepare to meet in Paris, what are the key issues that'll be on the table? And is there still time for us all to shape the future of AI for the better? From The Guardian, I'm Madeline Finlay, and this is Science Weekly. Dan Milmo, you're The Guardian's global technology editor, and we've just been hearing some of the thoughts and concerns of young people at the AI Children's Summit. And that's going to be summarised into a children's charter and taken to the Paris AI Summit, which is having its two sort of big days at the start of next week. But before we delve into what's going to be on the agenda there, I'm curious about the event itself. What kind of impact does it actually have?
Well, it's going to be a big talking shop, that's for sure. All the big names that you can imagine in terms of geopolitics and AI are going to be there. So you've got Sir Demis Hassabis, the British head of Google's AI arm, who's just won a Nobel Prize. He'll be there. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, will obviously be hosting. J.D. Vance, the vice president of the United States, will be there. So there's definitely a lot of chatting, a lot of communiques saying big words about safety and cooperation. I kind of think more needs to be done than just that. But nonetheless, getting everyone who's important in AI and in geopolitics in the same room, as it were, in Paris is a good thing.
And to get a sense of what might be happening, in those conversations with all these important people around AI, ahead of the summit, you've been speaking to some of the godfathers, as they're known, of AI. What have they been focusing on?
Well, one of the three godfathers of modern AI, as they're called, Yoshua Bengio, he's a very senior figure and respected figure in AI. He is concerned, as he has been for several years now, that the technology is advancing too quickly. It's advancing ahead of testing. It's advancing ahead of regulation. And he wants Paris to be a moment where government leaders in particular get their heads around that and acknowledge it and take action, as indeed was the case at the inaugural summit in 2023 in the UK. But Yoshua Bengio wants more to be done. And I think there are, however, voices who are slightly more moderate on this, including one of the other godfathers who I talked to on Tuesday, Yann LeCun. He's now the head of AI at Meta. And he's always said that AI has the capacity to save humanity as opposed to threaten it. So there are obviously positive voices out there too, and they will be heard at Paris.
You mentioned the UK's AI summit at Bletchley Park, and that was really focused on this idea of AI as an existential threat. And recently, the third godfather of AI, Nobel Prize winner Geoffrey Hinton, once again emphasised his fears around the risks to humanity of creating a superintelligence. At the same time, Trump has just scrapped Joe Biden's AI safety accords. So is safety going to be high on the agenda for Paris?
Well, I think the agenda is definitely different compared with the conference at Bletchley Park in 2023. Safety isn't at the forefront at all. The conference is split into sort of 5 themes, which are international governance, trust, innovation and culture, work, and making AI work in the public interest. So it's going to be, I think, a more positive summit in terms of its agenda. I think it is also going to mention sustainability, which is a good thing. That didn't get much of a look in at Bletchley Park. I just think the issue of safety, it won't go away because safety in AI encapsulates a lot of things, It goes from biased outputs to it being used to create misinformation to systems evading control, which is a bit more of a medium to long-term thing, I guess. So it'll still be there in the background, but I think this summit is definitely going to focus on different issues.
So lots of interesting topics for the delegates to explore, but I wonder about some of the conversations that are likely going to be happening in the corridors, because a few weeks back, there was this huge story that came out.
Technology shares on Wall Street have fallen sharply in response to the emergence of a low-cost chatbot built by a Chinese artificial intelligence firm.
Here's why. There's a Chinese startup that few people had ever heard of until the past few days, and it has emerged as a real player in the AI arms race. It's called DeepSeek.
So it'd be great to understand, for those that don't know, what is DeepSeek and why did it suddenly kind of almost change the game?
Well, DeepSeek is a Chinese company that released a powerful AI model on the day that Donald Trump took office. So the launch of all of this caused a big hoo-ha and rattled American tech investors because A, it kind of came out of nowhere, and B, DeepSeek claimed to have made it with much fewer resources than the big US tech firms make their models with. So it raised a couple of questions. Are US tech firms as far ahead in the race to build powerful and effective AIs as we thought? Well, obviously not. And then secondly, has it been wise of them to invest hundreds of billions of dollars into developing these products when DeepSeek appears to have invested not very much at all to get comparable results from its own models and chatbot? So what DeepSeek represented was an upseating of expectations and assumptions about where the AI race is heading.
How do you think DeepSeek could influence the discussions at Paris?
Well, I think the importance of China being involved in any discussions about a global effort on making sure that AI stays safe and is deployed responsibly. I think it underlines the fact that China really needs to be in those conversations. I think it will certainly encourage a discussion about the fact that the availability of powerful AI systems will be quite broad, potentially, given that DeepSeek is a so-called open source model. And also that change is happening quickly and coming from unexpected places, and that if you're going to harness it and be on top of it, then it will take a truly global effort to do so.
And one of the things that was so startling about DeepSeek was that it demonstrated that you could significantly reduce the energy consumption of these tools. But then again, if you are able to create these tools that use fewer resources, the more people are going to use them. So how will leaders in Paris be trying to find ways to deal with the sustainability issues of AI?
I think it's going to be difficult for leading governments to put the brakes on AI development. It's a very competitive field where practitioners can up sticks and move somewhere else if they're not feeling comfortable. So it just depends on your faith in the ability of leading nations to actually come together and say, look, let's prioritize the environment over the development of a technology that could give any country that leads in it quite an economic edge over others. I think we can expect some form of announcement on sustainability and AI, but after an announcement has to come practice and achievement and implementation. I think the fact that the UK managed to kick off this whole process in 2023 and get big political and tech figures around the table is a positive. And the fact that it's happening still in Paris, I think that's very important too. But, this is a time of geopolitical tension. We've seen Donald Trump has imposed tariffs on China, and obviously there's been retaliation from Beijing. In that sort of context, it's difficult to imagine there being a willingness to down tools in one corner of this fight and collaborate over AI.
And staying on this topic of geopolitical tensions and this idea that there could be a potential arms race around AI, another thing that's emerged this week, which could be a talking point at the summit, is the decision by Google to lift its ban on using AI for weapons and surveillance, which feels like it could be quite significant, or at least symbolic. What did you make of it?
Well, I think US tech firms have already shown a willingness to merge AI and defense, or use AI in a defense capability. Palantir, which is a very big US government contractor, works in defense. Meta, the owner of Facebook and Instagram, has said that it will allow its Llama program to be used by US national security agencies and defense contractors. So Google sort of dropping this pledge not to use AI for weapons and surveillance tools is sort of following the crowd in many ways. Google, in its sort of circumspect explanation of why it's doing this, it says, AI should be able to promote global growth and support national security. So I guess we'll be seeing its technology being used in that field to protect national security, and it depends how you define that. But obviously it does open a gateway for uses that people might object to.
And finally, Dan, going back to the Children's AI Summit, one thing that I was really struck by while I was there was how engaged all the young people were, not just in using the technology, but in recognising its shortcomings, where it could hold promise, the areas that potentially even needed regulation or deeper consideration. And of course, that generation are going to be bearing the brunt of the impacts of AI on the environment, on jobs. But is it too late for us all to have a meaningful role in shaping things for the better?
I think AI, just as Yoshua Bengio said when I spoke to him, the outcomes from this technology can either be negative or positive. It goes from one polar to another. So there is still time to grasp it. And I think from what you're saying about the Children's Conference, I think that's really important. I don't think that a technology with this much potential to cause vast change can continue developing in the way it is without the public beginning to get really quite involved and annoyed about it, particularly if it has consequences economically in terms of the labour market. I mean, obviously there's been a lot written about the fact it could impact in particular, white collar industries such as finance, law, actually healthcare as well. But that's not manifested itself in wholesale job losses. But I think it's a process that needs to be monitored very closely by governments and by companies that are going to be deploying this technology. And hopefully that will be discussed very closely in Paris.
Yeah, I fear the podcasters aren't safe.
Well, I know I've been talking to an automated voice. I think you'll be fine because, we'll be fine. It comes out of trust, right? I mean, I think if there's one thing that will emerge from the sort of giant cartoon dust cloud that AI is, with fists and legs poking out of it at the moment, is that people will want news resources that they can trust. And knowing that something isn't completely a product of artifice, I think will be in that podcast or news article or piece of culture's favour, in my opinion.
Well, Dan, I know that you're hoping to make it to Paris next week, so I hope you do, and I'll be interested to read what happens while you're there.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again to Dan Milmo. You can follow all his reporting on the summit at theguardian.com. And thanks to the Alan Turing Institute and all the young people we spoke to at their summit. And as companies like Google and Meta continue to develop their AI systems, The Guardian will be there to cover every twist and turn. But that coverage needs your support. We're not owned by a billionaire telling us what to report or how, which means we rely on you, our listeners and readers. So if you're able to, please consider supporting The Guardian via the link in the episode description. Thank you. And that's all from us today. This episode was produced by Tom Glasser, the sound design was by Tony Onochukwu, and the executive producer is Ellie Bury. We'll be back on Tuesday. See you then.
This is The Guardian.
Enjoying this podcast? Then we think you might love the audio long read, the podcast of The Guardian long read, with episodes about caffeine addiction, the secret life of saints, and Britain's strangest pub chain. The long read offers great stories and big ideas. Follow the audio long read wherever you get your podcasts.